Hi Legends. So this lesson is going to be about photosynthesis and the energy transformations that happen during photosynthesis. Here are the questions for your catalyst. Go ahead and do those now by pausing the video. Okay, so here the answer to number 1, the function of the seed, you have the endosperm, embryo, and the seed coat. Seed coat's job is to protect. Endosperm's job is to give nutrients to the seed, and the embryo is the part that's going to grow into the little plant. Second, number 1, record your observations of the plants. All of those plants that we plant, all of the seeds we planted germinated in the back of the classroom. 3, an organism that is an autotroph an autotroph is an organism that can produce its own food inside of itself. 4, most plants are green because they contain chloroplasts, and we're going to learn why chloroplasts are green today too. So the definition of photosynthesis is basically the plant's process for making its own food. Plants don't eat food that someone makes for them. They have to make it themselves inside of themselves. So photosynthesis is the steps that they do to make that food. So what does photosynthesis look like? Well, basically a plant needs sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. All of those things need to eventually make it to the leaf and into the chloroplast of the cells in the leaf. All of those things get mixed up, kind of like ingredients. Just like when you're cooking in your own kitchen, you have to mix up the ingredients to make whatever it is that you want to make, whether it's a birthday cake or something like that. So plants need to mix up those ingredients, and they produce 2 things. They make their food, which is glucose, a type of sugar, and they also make oxygen, which the plants aren't going to use, but we end up using that oxygen. But really in photosynthesis, the plant cares about making that food for itself. Just want to point out that when the plant makes that food for itself, besides calling it glucose, I could also say that it's carbohydrates. You should remember from when we talked about Unit 2 and digestive system, that carbohydrates are basically just long chains of sugar and glucose. So many names for the same thing. So what goes on in photosynthesis? Well, besides making the food, there's a process where the energy is getting transformed from one energy type to another. So plants take energy from the sun and transform it or change it into the energy that gets stored in their food. So let's see exactly what that looks like. First, you should remember from 6th grade that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred or transformed. So energy can only go from one place to another, like this little fish, or it can transform or change the type of the type of energy that it is by but you're not creating new energy and you're also not destroying it. So photosynthesis does not make energy. It just changes it. So we start with radiant energy. That's going to be a vocab word. Radiant energy is just energy from the sun. And that energy, which we start with, gets turned into chemical energy. That's another vocab word. Chemical energy is what gets stored inside of that glucose or that sugar. So no new energy was made. It just switched from being radiant energy to chemical energy. So it's pretty cool that plants can do that. So just quiz yourself, what are the different types of energy and where do they come from? You should have said that radiant energy comes from the sun, and chemical energy is stored in plant food. So one transformed into the other. So what gets transformed in photosynthesis? You should have answered radiant energy transformed into chemical energy. So where does this all happen? Photosynthesis happens in the leaves, if you're talking about the organ in the plant. So you have your leaf. Photosynthesis mostly happens there. That's why the leaves are the greenest parts of the plant. Wherever you see green, that means there's lots of chloroplasts there. But if I want to be specific about where photosynthesis happens, it's really happening in those chloroplasts inside of the cells. So what do chloroplasts look like? Well, here's our plant cell, and those green things in there are the chloroplasts. You'll remember that I described the chloroplast as kind of like a jelly bean, green jelly bean looking thing with like stacks of green pancakes inside. Here are what chloroplasts look like in plant cells underneath the microscope. Here's another drawing or cartoon of a chloroplast, but that's where photosynthesis is really going on. Now, the chloroplasts are green because they have something called a pigment. A pigment is just a fancy scientific way for saying a color. The type of color or pigment that a chloroplast has is called chlorophyll. You'll notice that chloroplast and chlorophyll both have this chloro in it. So what do you think chloro might mean? Chloro actually means green, and both of those things are green. So green is actually the color that plants are, because green is the best color for absorbing the sunlight that the plants need. And here's our green chloroplast once again. So when you think about the seedlings in our classroom, after I came back from Thanksgiving break, all of the seedlings that had been growing in the back of our classroom were actually growing in darkness because someone had turned off the lights in my classroom. So when I first walked in my class and turned on the lights, I noticed that the plants looked very yellowy. They had like yellowy leaves. They did not look green at all. But if you look at the plants that were by the window outside of the class, those plants after Thanksgiving break had very green leaves. And this is not a great picture, but you can see that they're much greener than the ones inside the classroom where it was dark. Now you can use your scientific knowledge to understand why a plant that is not in sunlight, not absorbing light, wouldn't look as green. Do you think that this plant in the classroom needed chlorophyll to absorb any light? Well, there was no light, so it didn't need the chlorophyll during those dark days during Thanksgiving break where it was just sitting in the darkness. So go ahead and quiz yourself. What part of the cell is where photosynthesis happens? You should have chosen C, chloroplast. If you chose D, the reason why D is incorrect is because the question asked for what part of the cell, and the chloroplast is part of the cell, but the leaf is obviously an organ. So why do you think leaves are green? Leaves are green because that's where photosynthesis is going to be happening, and in order for photosynthesis to happen, you need to absorb sunlight. And remember, the color green is going to get the type of light that is best for photosynthesis. So why is photosynthesis important? There are two main reasons that you'll need to know. The first, or the primary reason, is that photosynthesis makes food for the plant. That's the whole point of this for the plant. And the second reason that photosynthesis is important actually has nothing to do with the plant, has to do with us. The waste product that plants excrete is oxygen. And the plants aren't going to use the oxygen, but we sure will when we breathe in. So check yourself. Why is photosynthesis important for the plant? How is photosynthesis important for humans? Go ahead and take a minute or two to answer those questions. Okay, you should have said that photosynthesis is important for the plant because it makes food for the plant, and photosynthesis is important for humans because it gives us oxygen to breathe. Here's a critical thinking question that if you would like a challenge, you can think about the answer to this question and then tell me in class. And here's the foldable that you have to create for homework. You're going to take a piece of paper, fold it hot dog style, and then create 4 sections on the top flap where you'll copy down these questions. Each of these questions has to do with what we just went over in the notes. When you lift up the flaps to this foldable, you're going to put the answers to each of these questions. So under the first flap, you're going to put the definition of photosynthesis, and you're going to draw a picture of photosynthesis, a picture that represents photosynthesis. In this flap, you'll talk about the energy transformation that happens. Under this flap is where you will tell me where photosynthesis happens and draw a picture of each of those places. And then lastly, you're going to tell me about the 2 reasons why photosynthesis is important for humans and for plants. Here are just those rules again for the foldable. I do expect you to use color and make sure that you have correctly labeled everything and put all of the important information from your notes. All right, and then here are some exit ticket questions just to really make sure that you understood the main points. All right, happy studying.